On a July night in 2006, a Hollywood idol was pulled over on Pacific Coast Highway, and the fallout scorched his legend. Mel Gibson, the once untouchable star of Lethal Weapon and the Oscar-winning director of Braveheart, was arrested for DUI and launched into an anti-Semitic tirade that detonated across the world. 4 years later, a new shockwave hit, a series of leaked recordings in which Gibson hurled racist slurs and violent threats, followed by a 2011 no-contest plea to misdemeanor battery involving his then-partner, Oksana Grigorieva. In an industry that profits from scandal yet punishes it selectively, Gibson became both pariah and proof of Hollywood's double standard, blacklisted by many, tentatively courted by a few. Then came 2016 and Hacksaw Ridge, 6 Oscar nominations, 2 wins, and the question everyone dreaded: can artistry redeem the artist? Or does it merely rebrand him? This is the rise, the implosion, and the uneasy return of Mel Gibson, a story of power, prejudice, contrition claimed and contested. What breaks a superstar, private vice or public exposure, and what, if anything, earns a path back? Mel Columcille Gerard Gibson was born on January 3, 1956, in Peekskill, New York, the 6th of 11 children. His father, Hutton Gibson, was an outspoken and deeply conservative man, known for his rigid religious views and controversial statements that often bordered on conspiracy theories. His mother, Anne Patricia Riley, was of Irish descent and a devout Catholic, shaping much of Mel's early faith and cultural identity. When Mel was 12 years old, the family's world shifted dramatically. In the wake of the Vietnam War draft and Hutton's disillusionment with America, the Gibsons relocated to Sydney, Australia. This move would prove pivotal. In the United States, Mel had been one of many. In Australia, he became the American transplant navigating a new culture. The change of scenery also shielded him from the draft while exposing him to a different educational and artistic environment. The Gibson household was strict, dominated by religion and discipline, but also filled with the energy of a large family. Mel was shy and introverted as a child, often overshadowed by louder siblings. Yet he absorbed the contradictions of his parents, his father's defiance and his mother's devotion. Those traits, rebelliousness and fervent belief, would later echo throughout his life and career. Despite his quiet demeanor, Mel displayed an early talent for performance, entertaining siblings with impressions and storytelling. His high school teachers noted both his intelligence and his tendency to drift. Initially, he had little direction beyond a vague interest in the arts, but his sister Shelia, recognizing his potential, applied on his behalf to the National Institute of Dramatic Art, NIDA, in Sydney. That single gesture changed his destiny. Mel Gibson's childhood was marked by both turbulence and opportunity. A father whose fiery rhetoric courted controversy, a mother whose Catholic faith shaped his conscience, and a family move that pulled him into a world where acting would become both an escape and a calling. In Sydney, the young Mel Gibson's path toward acting began almost by accident. His sister, recognizing a spark in him, submitted an application on his behalf to the National Institute of Dramatic Art, NIDA, Australia's most prestigious acting school. Gibson was accepted, and though initially unsure, he quickly immersed himself in the craft. At NIDA, he trained in classical theater, studying Shakespeare and honing the discipline that would later distinguish him on screen. Classmates and instructors recalled his raw charisma, his ability to oscillate between intensity and vulnerability, and the natural magnetism that made him stand out among peers. While still a student, Gibson began acting in small stage productions, but his true breakthrough came with film. In 1977, he landed a role in the low-budget Australian thriller Summer City. A car accident shortly before filming left his face bruised, but the directors used it to their advantage, enhancing his rugged appeal. That same year, he graduated from NIDA, already marked as a talent to watch. The turning point was Mad Max, 1979, George Miller's dystopian action film. Made on a shoestring budget, it became a global phenomenon, catapulting Gibson into international stardom. His portrayal of Max Rokitansky, a stoic, haunted cop in a collapsing society, showcased both his physicality and emotional depth. Almost overnight, the shy boy from Peekskill transformed into Australia's newest export to Hollywood. Simultaneously, Gibson earned acclaim for his dramatic work in Tim, 1979. Playing a mentally challenged laborer, a role that won him the Australian Film Institute's Best Actor award. The contrast between the gritty action hero of Mad Max and the tender sensitivity of Tim revealed his range and cemented his reputation as a versatile actor. By the early 1980s, Mel Gibson was no longer just a promising student of acting. He was a rising star whose combination of classical training and rugged charisma positioned him for international fame. The boy who had once been uncertain about his path now had Hollywood in his sights. By the early 1980s, Mel Gibson had ascended from Australian newcomer to international star. The success of Mad Max, 1979, reverberated worldwide, and its sequels only heightened his reputation. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, 1981, became a cult phenomenon. Celebrated for its stark visuals and Gibson's gritty, stoic performance, by the time Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, 1985, hit theaters, Gibson was no longer just an Australian export, he was a global action icon. Yet it was his shift to Hollywood mainstream cinema that solidified his superstardom. In 1987, Gibson starred as Martin Riggs in Richard Donner's buddy cop thriller Lethal Weapon. The film paired Gibson's unhinged, unpredictable energy with Danny Glover's calm steadiness, creating one of the most enduring screen duos of the era. The movie's massive success spawned 3 sequels, turning Riggs into one of the definitive action characters of the late 20th century. Gibson's blend of charm, volatility, and vulnerability made him irresistible to audiences, particularly in a genre often criticized for flat characters. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Gibson became one of the world's most bankable actors. He balanced blockbusters with more nuanced performances, starring in films like Tequila Sunrise, 1988, Bird on a Wire, 1990, and Hamlet, 1990, where he surprised critics by tackling Shakespeare with intensity and conviction. The range of his work showed he was not just a movie star. He was a serious actor capable of commanding both art house acclaim and commercial success. But Gibson wasn't content with acting alone. In the mid-1990s, he stepped behind the camera. His directorial debut, The Man Without a Face, 1993, was modest but respected. It was his second effort. However, that changed everything. Braveheart, 1995. In the sweeping historical epic, Gibson not only directed but also starred as William Wallace, the Scottish warrior leading a rebellion against English rule. Braveheart became a cultural event. Its battle sequences were visceral, its romance tragic, and its central cry of freedom unforgettable. The film won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Gibson. Suddenly, Mel Gibson was no longer just a star, he was an auteur, joining the ranks of Clint Eastwood and Kevin Costner as actors who had successfully transitioned to acclaimed directors. By the late 1990s, Gibson was at the very top of Hollywood. He starred in hits like Ransom, 1996, Conspiracy Theory, 1997, and The Patriot, 2000. His reputation was that of a leading man with both box office muscle and artistic ambition. Studios trusted him, audiences adored him, and his rugged charisma made him a fixture of People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive lists. At his peak, Gibson had it all: global stardom, critical respect, and immense financial power. He was one of the few actors whose name alone could guarantee a film's success. But beneath the triumphs, storm clouds were gathering. Known for his fiery temper and occasional erratic behavior, Gibson's private struggles with alcohol and his deeply ingrained prejudices simmered under the surface. The man celebrated for his artistry and charm carried contradictions that would one day detonate in scandal. Behind Mel Gibson's professional triumphs was a private life as turbulent as many of his on-screen roles. His longest and most significant relationship began in the mid-1970s. when he met Robin Moore, a dental nurse. Before his Hollywood stardom took off, the two married in 1980, just as Gibson's career was entering its global breakthrough. For decades, Robin provided a sense of stability and family life far removed from the chaos of Hollywood. Together, they had 7 children, a sprawling family that Gibson often cited as his grounding force. For years, Robin largely avoided the spotlight, raising their children in Australia and later in California while Mel traveled the world for film shoots. Their marriage was often held up in the press as proof that Gibson, unlike many Hollywood leading men, had managed to balance fame with family loyalty. But cracks began to appear. Gibson's struggles with alcohol and rumored infidelities strained the relationship. By the mid-2000s, after more than 25 years together, Robin filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The timing coincided with the height of Gibson's scandals, including his infamous 2006 DUI arrest. Their divorce, finalized in 2011, became one of the most expensive in Hollywood history, with Robin reportedly receiving over $400 million, half of Gibson's estimated fortune at the time. Soon after, Gibson entered a relationship with Russian pianist Oksana Grigorieva, with whom he had a daughter in 2009. What began as a glamorous pairing quickly devolved into one of the most public and damaging chapters of his life. In 2010, recordings surfaced of Gibson berating Grigorieva with racist and misogynistic language, alongside allegations of domestic violence. The tapes, shocking in their ferocity, painted a picture of a man consumed by rage and prejudice. The fallout was swift and brutal. Gibson's custody battle with Grigorieva became tabloid fodder, and his carefully crafted image as a family man lay in ruins. In 2011, he pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge related to the incident, further cementing his fall from grace. After the scandal, Gibson retreated from the public eye, but his love life continued to attract attention. In later years, he found a measure of stability with Rosalind Ross, a writer and former equestrian champion 35 years his junior. The couple welcomed a son in 2017, suggesting that Gibson was seeking a quieter domestic chapter after decades of turmoil. Mel Gibson's love life reveals the duality of his public persona, on one hand, the devoted husband and father of 9 children, on the other. A man whose addictions, anger, and infidelities sabotaged his closest relationships. Like his career, his private world has been a story of extremes, deep commitments overshadowed by destructive choices. For decades, Mel Gibson had built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, the charming anti-hero of Lethal Weapon, the visionary behind Braveheart, and a symbol of rugged charisma. But in the summer of 2006, that image imploded. Late one July night, Gibson was pulled over on Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu for driving under the influence. What should have been a routine DUI arrest escalated into an international scandal. According to the police report, Gibson launched into a drunken tirade, declaring, "The Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world." He allegedly called a female officer sugar tits, a crude remark that made headlines of its own. When the transcript leaked, Gibson's career collapsed overnight. He issued a public apology, admitting to a long battle with alcoholism and pledging to seek help. But the damage was done. Hollywood executives distanced themselves. Jewish organizations condemned his remarks, and the actor-director, once at the top of the industry, was branded an anti-Semite and misogynist. Just as he was beginning to repair his reputation, another bombshell dropped. In 2010, recordings surfaced of Gibson berating his then-partner, Russian pianist Oksana Grigorieva. The tapes captured Gibson spewing racist slurs, using violent threats, and unleashing a torrent of rage that shocked even his longtime defenders. Among the most infamous lines, "You look like a effing pig in heat." The recordings also fueled allegations of domestic violence, with Grigorieva accusing Gibson of physically assaulting her during their relationship. The fallout was catastrophic. In 2011, Gibson pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge stemming from the altercation. His once loyal fanbase fractured. with many unable to reconcile the beloved star of Braveheart with the abusive voice on those recordings. The scandal dominated tabloids for months, with every development in the custody battle over their daughter making front-page news. Professionally, Gibson was radioactive. Studios cut ties, actors refused to work with him, and his agency dropped him. Projects he had been developing stalled or were cancelled outright. Even in an industry notorious for forgiving bad behavior, Gibson's offenses seemed beyond the pale. He was no longer the darling of Hollywood, he was its pariah. Complicating matters was Gibson's reputation for volatility on set. Stories resurfaced of his temper during earlier productions, with crew members and colleagues recalling racist jokes, sexist remarks, and unpredictable outbursts. The image of the charismatic leading man was replaced by that of a troubled, dangerous figure who had allowed his demons to overwhelm him. The scandal also struck at Gibson's core identity as a filmmaker of faith. His 2004 film The Passion of the Christ had been both a box office juggernaut and a lightning rod for accusations of anti-Semitism. After the DUI arrest and the tapes with Grigorieva, critics argued that the film's controversial elements reflected Gibson's personal prejudices rather than artistic vision. The director, who once claimed to make films about sacrifice and redemption, now found himself accused of embodying the very hatred he had always denied. By the early 2010s, Gibson's downfall was complete. Once one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, he was reduced to punchlines on late-night television and vilified in the press. Roles dried up, directing opportunities vanished, and Gibson, now in his mid-50s, seemed destined for permanent exile. The scandal of Mel Gibson was not a single incident but a cascade of revelations: the DUI, the anti-Semitic slurs, the misogynistic remarks, the violent threats, the battery conviction. Each layer reinforced the last, creating a portrait of a man consumed by anger and addiction. Unlike many stars whose missteps are forgotten with time, Gibson's offenses were recorded, transcribed, and replayed endlessly, ensuring they could never be erased from the public consciousness. For Hollywood, his implosion was a sobering reminder of how quickly a career can collapse under the weight of personal demons. For Gibson, it was the end of an era, the transformation from Oscar-winning auteur to disgraced exile. The fallout from Mel Gibson's scandals was swift, merciless, and deeply personal. Professionally, he was blacklisted, studios dropped him from projects, agents and collaborators cut ties, and Hollywood journalists openly debated whether his career was permanently over. Gibson, once courted for his charm and box office power, had become a liability. Financially, the collapse was devastating. His 2011 divorce from Robin Moore had already cost him an estimated $400 million. One of the largest settlements in Hollywood history. Combined with legal fees, custody battles, and the loss of acting and directing opportunities, Gibson's once immense fortune was dramatically reduced. More painful, perhaps, was the erosion of his reputation. Once praised as an actor's actor and an Oscar-winning director, he was now shorthand for scandal, a cautionary tale about unchecked temper, prejudice, and addiction. For several years, Gibson disappeared from the spotlight. He focused on sobriety, attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and admitting in interviews that alcohol had exacerbated his worst tendencies. He also retreated into smaller creative endeavors, producing and financing independent films. Still, his name remained toxic in mainstream circles. The first signs of a tentative return came when fellow actors and directors, including Jodie Foster and Robert Downey Jr., publicly defended him. At the 2011 American Cinematheque Award ceremony, Downey urged Hollywood to forgive Gibson, framing him as a man struggling with demons but deserving of redemption. The plea resonated, but it did not erase the stigma. Gibson's true comeback attempt arrived with Hacksaw Ridge, 2016. Directing Andrew Garfield in the true story of World War II medic Desmond Doss, Gibson returned to the themes of faith, sacrifice, and violence that had long defined his work. The film was both a critical and commercial success, grossing over $180 million worldwide and earning 6 Academy Award nominations. including Best Director for Gibson. Suddenly, Hollywood was forced to reconsider him, not as a forgiven man, but as an undeniably talented filmmaker. The success of Hacksaw Ridge reignited debates about redemption in Hollywood. Some argued that Gibson's artistry could not erase the harm of his past words and actions, particularly to Jewish communities and women who had endured abuse. Others believed that his years in exile, his public contrition, and his demonstrable sobriety offered grounds for a second chance. For better or worse, Gibson had re-entered the conversation, not as a star at the center of the industry, but as an outsider clawing back relevance. Since then, Gibson has worked sporadically, both as an actor in low to mid-budget films and as a director exploring new projects, including plans for a sequel to The Passion of the Christ. Yet the shadow of his scandals continues to loom. Every new announcement about his career is accompanied by reminders of his past. Proof that forgiveness in Hollywood is possible but never total. For Gibson, the consequences of his downfall remain permanent scars. But his comeback through Hacksaw Ridge proved that exile is not always final. Whether viewed as redemption or opportunistic reinvention, his return underscored the uncomfortable truth: in Hollywood, talent can sometimes outlast even the gravest sins. Today, Mel Gibson exists in a strange middle ground between exile and acceptance. No longer the untouchable superstar of the 1990s, he is also not the pariah he was branded in the late 2000s. Instead, he occupies a liminal space, working steadily in smaller films, occasionally directing, and living a quieter personal life with his partner, Rosalind Ross, and their young son. Professionally, Gibson remains a paradox. On one hand, Hacksaw Ridge, 2016, restored a measure of credibility, proving that his eye as a filmmaker is as sharp as ever. He has continued to attach himself to projects, from action thrillers like Dragged Across Concrete, 2018, to rumored big-budget ventures. On the other hand, every press release bearing his name still triggers a familiar cycle: outrage, debate, and the resurfacing of his darkest moments. Gibson may work, but he will never again enjoy the uncritical adoration that once defined his career. Public opinion mirrors this divide. Some see him as a man who served his time, admitted his flaws, and earned the right to move forward. Others believe his apologies never matched the gravity of his words and actions, and that his continued opportunities reflect Hollywood's selective morality. The question of Gibson's redemption is unresolved, and perhaps it always will be. In his private life, Gibson appears calmer. Sobriety, fatherhood, and distance from the media spotlight have softened his once volatile image. Friends and collaborators describe him as humbled, reflective, even grateful for a second chance. However limited, yet the recordings, the arrests, and the scandals are never far from memory. Mel Gibson's present is defined less by triumph or disgrace than by tension between the two. He is proof that Hollywood can punish, forgive, and still hesitate all at once. His legacy is permanently complicated: a brilliant filmmaker, a fallen idol, a man whose personal demons became global spectacle. The final question remains open: will time continue to soften his reputation, allowing history to remember his art more than his scandals? Or will the name Mel Gibson forever evoke both the roar of freedom and the whispers of rage caught on tape?